Hello, everyone. My name is Doug Hagerman, and I'm chair of the League Board. Welcome. So today we have a triple bill. We have remarks by the chair of the NEA, we have our annual meeting of League members, and we have our keynote speech by Nina Simon. We'll be moving quickly through the agenda, so let's get started. Today's session has been generously sponsored by Fisher Dax Associates. Fisher Dax is one of the world's leading theater design consultants, theater planning and design consultants. Their mission is to help their clients plan and design successful projects in accordance with real programmatic and budgetary goals. They're represented here today by Associate Principal Robert Campbell, Chief Intelligence Officer Alexa Anapol, and Marketing Associate Richard Hackman. We thank Fisher Dax for their support of our programming and want to invite you to visit them and all of our vendors and exhibitors in our virtual exhibit hall after this session. It's my pleasure now to introduce Mary Ann Carter, the chairman of the National Endowment of the Arts. Under Chairman Carter's leadership of the NEA since 2018, the work of the agency has gained public visibility and sustained support from Congress. Chairman Carter's travels across the country have brought greater visibility to the NEA's critical investments in making the arts more accessible for all. And she's demonstrated her deep passion for the arts. Chairman Carter, we're grateful for the NEA's ongoing support for orchestras and for your partnership in advancing the arts nationwide. Thank you for joining us today. Go ahead.
Let me unmute myself. Doug, thank you so much. And Jesse, thank you and your entire team at the League for pivoting so quickly to a virtual conference. And Simon, welcome and congratulations. And I look forward to working with you. I am thrilled to be a part of this year's landmark meeting. I understand that this conference has 3 times more registrants than usual. So ironically, by being apart, we're actually coming together more. And we need to. This is an incredibly challenging time, and especially for the performing arts. And yet, despite the unknown and the uncertainty, you continue to create and share your music. I applaud the orchestra community for adapting so quickly to this new digital environment. I personally have seen so many incredible performances taking place over Zoom or some other online platform. You are filling our homes with music, and I always feel like I have the best seat in the house. There has been something so moving and beautiful about seeing members of an orchestra alone in their homes, yet playing together on screens in our homes. And that music, your music, is a critical part of our national well-being, and it will be a critical part of our recovery. So thank you. Thank you for insisting that no matter what is going on in the world around us, there will always be music. And by turning lemons into lemonade, these online concerts have introduced people all over the country to orchestral music. And I suspect a lot of these people watching these streams have never before stepped foot into a concert hall. So this positive development of new audiences also brings a new challenge. How do we make these online audiences economically viable? And how do we bring them through the door once we do reopen? And that, of course, is the million-dollar question. When will we be able to put a full orchestra back on stage with a sold-out audience? And until then, what strategies can we use as a bridge? Are partial reopenings a possibility? How do we ensure the safety of our performers, our staff, our audiences? We have been surveying organizations across the art disciplines to hear their thoughts and their fears about reopening, to help us zero in on priorities. And another priority for us is to provide some measure of financial relief as quickly as possible. In March, the National Endowment for the Arts received $75 million through the CARES Act. Less than 3 weeks later, we awarded nearly $30 million to our state and regional arts organizations, who in turn are going to redistribute the money to organizations throughout their jurisdictions. And that will cover jobs, preserving jobs, and operating costs. The remaining $45 million will be awarded to individual nonprofit arts organizations throughout the country. And we are working hard to get those grants out the door. We'll announce the CARES Act awards by June 30th. The money will be out the door by July 1st, and that is 3 times faster than our normal timeline. Our website, arts.gov, has a COVID-19 resource center, including FAQs and updates for current and prospective grantees. And we also have tools for how to make sure your virtual event is accessible for people with disabilities. So please reach out to the agency if you have any questions. We truly are in this together. I want to thank you so much for being here today and thank the League. And please stay safe, stay healthy, and always let the music play.
I'm going to clap on behalf of the whole audience there, Marianne. Thank you so much. We're truly grateful for your passion and support of our members. Thank you so much for being with us today. Next, we're going to turn to our 2020 first virtual annual meeting of the League of American Orchestras. This has been a big year for the League, even before a pandemic hit. We implemented our 4-pronged infrastructure investment that we talked about previously to improve our member service and our efficiency. We invested in technology platforms, started to build a new website, and moved to better offices at a lower price. We're working to finish the fundraising campaign that's going to pay for all of that. The League staff coped with all of that and all of that change, but also pivoted to online meetings, online conference, this whole conference for 6 weeks. And our work in Washington has been of massive value to all sizes, especially when our representatives in Washington, Heather and Nedjan, hit overdrive to ensure financial support of orchestras in the face of the pandemic. I'm pretty sure that if we were meeting in person, that comment would draw an ovation of gratitude for their work. To top it all off, we selected Simon Woods as our next CEO to succeed Jesse this fall. Here are some brief comments about the League's fiscal 2019 financial results. With a budget of just over $8.2 million, we ended with a small operating surplus of about $23,000. Incidentally, the $8.2 million budget includes our regranting programs, so part of it's money in the door from donors and back out to our members. The League's assets were just over $10.9 million, with a $3.5 million endowment fund, over $900,000 in reserves, and a $400,000 change capital fund. For the current fiscal year, fiscal 2020, we're anticipating a deficit of $200,000 to $250,000. So now we're going to turn to the business portion of the meeting and the elections for the board of directors. This year, since we're having this as a virtual meeting, Instead of having a voice vote or a show of hands, we're asking you to vote through an online portal at this time. The primary contact for each orchestra will receive an email with the slate of members and a link for how to cast your ballot. Watch your inbox for these mailings. I'll now review the board members standing for election. The full board has approved the following nominees and proposes them for election by the membership to a 3-year term. We'll go to slide 2. There we go. Lorenzo Frank Candelaria is the Dean of the Blair School of Music at Vanderbilt University. Marisa Eisenman is a physician and former chair of the Albany Symphony. Mary Lou Gorno is the vice chair of the Chicago Symphony. Jennifer Coe is a violinist, new music promoter, and founder and artistic director of the ARCO Collaborative. Howard Palevsky is the immediate past chair of the Atlanta Symphony. And Mark Peacock is a physician pulmonologist and chair of the Nashville Symphony. Finally, Daniel Song is the vice president of the Los Angeles Philharmonic, responsible for Philharmonic and production. And he's the former vice president and GM of the Aspen Music Festival. These are all directors who were added to the board within the last year or so, and so they're standing for election to full terms now. In addition, the following board members are proposed for re-election to 3-year terms. Myself, Douglas Hagerman, Gloria Di Pasquale, Marion Godfrey, Anthony McGill, Kate Moyer, Lowell Notaboom, Pat Richards, and Bob Wagner. The following ex officio members are retiring, and we want to thank them for their service. Megan Balda, representing the Youth Orchestra Division, Heather Clark, representing the Group 7 and 8 managers, and Terry Ann White, representing the Volunteer Council. The following people will serve on the league board going forward as their replacements as ex officio members. Rosina Canizaro of the Vermont Youth Orchestra Association will chair the Youth Orchestra Division. Catherine Boucher of the Spartanburg Philharmonic will chair Groups 7 and 8. And Cindy Kidwell from the East Texas Symphony is the new president of the Volunteer Council. The League Board of Directors will elect officers at its board meeting this summer. The following is the slate of officers that are currently proposed for election. Myself as chair, Melanie Clark and Steve Parrish as vice chairs, Burton Alter as treasurer, and Aaron Flagg as secretary. We want to thank them as well as our outgoing secretary, Helen Schaefer. So now it's my great pleasure, having concluded the business portion of the annual meeting, to welcome Jesse Rosen for some remarks.
Thank you, Doug. This is my last annual meeting as the League CEO, and I put on a sports jacket for the occasion, and this turned out to be the happiest moment of the day so far because it actually still fit, which is an unbelievable surprise after everything I've been eating and drinking for the last 3 months. I'm sure you can all relate to that. You know, I could reminisce about the last 22 years, but that probably wouldn't interest anybody, including me, and thought it more appropriate to talk a little bit about the future and some of the things that I think are going to be really important in our work ahead. But I do want to just take a moment to say, you know, how much I value the privilege of having been able to, you know, to work on behalf of all of you for a very long time. And, you know, the probably by now hundreds of concerts I've been to and boardrooms I've been in and staff meetings and, you know, so much time together with so many of you over the years. It's just been an incredibly enriching part of my life, and my heart is open to all of you with enormous gratitude and thanks. And I'm sure I plan to stick around. It's not to end, you know, I'll be here for the rest of the conference and, you know, through the summer and probably beyond in some way. But anyhow, I just want to let you know how much this experience has meant to me, and my thanks to all of you. So thinking about the future, you know, there's been a lot of great work in orchestras in recent years and a lot to be encouraged about. And I think some things to really build on as we look ahead. And there are four things that I want to talk about. The first one is our cultures, our organizational cultures, and in particular, the ability to work collaboratively, and specifically thinking about the last 2 months when musicians and managers together faced into this unbelievably harsh economic and health crisis and figured out how to navigate this together. And with a spirit of shared sacrifice, musicians and managements figured out how to make this work. We have a lot of work ahead, but this was a really strong showing of our ability to function successfully together. And you know, there's like nothing more important coming down the pike than for musicians and managers together to figure out how do we create safe work environments. And this is work that must be done collaboratively. This is not adversarial. This is together. This is partnership. And it's my profound hope that we'll figure out how to do this work together. It is really, really crucial and important. The second thing I want to talk about is talent and leadership development, and not leadership with a capital L CEO, but leadership in terms of the qualities that really matter for being able to have resilient and healthy and strong organizations, particularly in times like this, but at all times. And you know, I've come to believe that at the League and also among you in our field, we've looked at this issue through the wrong end of the telescope. And by that I mean, we've thought about programs. You know, so the League makes programs. We have some great programs. We've got Orchestra Management Fellowship Program, Emerging Leaders, Essentials. Harvard's got a great executive program. Stanford, Center for Creative Leadership, National Art. We do a lot of good programs. We're all going to keep doing them. But we also know that 80% of professional development happens on the job. And so what does that mean? That means if we want to see change, the change has to happen in our organizations. We have to behave differently to identify and support talent. And you know, most orchestras don't have a dedicated HR person, and not because they don't want to, it's a question of scale. And so in the face of that, we still have to figure out how to bring intentional, thoughtful, caring, intelligent work on behalf of the people working in our organizations. And by the way, this is governance work too. Boards need to be sure that their CEOs have what they need to be successful and to continue to grow and want to stay in their jobs. And they need to be paying attention to whether or not their CEO is doing the same with their staffs. And we are always expressing our frustration of not enough talent, not enough people want to come into the field, or openings, not enough people. Well, the work really is work that we need to do inside our own organizations. That's where the opportunity is, and the League can help with that. The third thing I want to talk about is the imperatives of equity, diversity, and inclusion, which today ought to be in the center of our work, not in the periphery. And I was recently at a meeting with my peers, some of my peers who run national art service organizations, and the topic on the agenda was about equity. And one of my colleagues said, you know, I don't know how I can be expected to think about that issue now. It takes every ounce of energy I have to hold my organization together. We are on the ropes. My membership is on the ropes. I need to look after them. How could I possibly be involved with this question? So I think that's fundamentally wrong-headed, and it suggests that somehow these imperatives are things we put on and take off as is convenient. And if you think of it like we think about excellence, which is a enduring value in orchestra, something that we organize our lives and our organizations around. We would never say, well, we're going to forego excellence for a while because it's too complicated or too hard. We have other things to do. So equity, diversity, inclusion are just like excellence. If we really mean it, then they are things that will stay in the center of our work, and they will in fact inform how we continue to navigate the crisis that we're all working through. The fourth thing I want to talk about is creativity. And, you know, I love orchestras, you love orchestras, we love the concerts, we love the music, but geez, you know, we can do more on the creative side. We have not changed very much in a very long time. And, you know, before the pandemic, after the pandemic, the amount of talent and expression coming out of our country, coming out of the world, is just at an all-time high. And we are, at the end of the day, you know, what makes us who we are is we are orchestras. We're about this art form and ensuring it continues to grow and evolve. And if you need any evidence of what has heretofore been untapped creative talent, just look at the way musicians have pivoted to figure out how to do music from home, online, and reach exponentially more people than we reach in our concert halls. And right there, enormous talent available to us. Or look at the San Francisco Symphony. When Esa-Pekka Salonen becomes music director, what does he do? He says, I'll be your music director, but I need 8 other artistic partners to do this work. And some of them aren't even in music. One of them is a roboticist. What is that telling us? I think it's telling us 2 things. Number one, the creative potential of our organizations is enormous. And it's also suggesting to us that maybe we need to think differently about who's involved, how we do the work, how do we structure and organize our organizations so that we unleash the real creative potential that's available. You know, Alex Lang, who many of you know, great colleague, fond of talking about orchestras as machines, and not in a happy, positive way, kind of in a critical way. And orchestras are really good at making concerts. It's time we think about what's the work we need to do and make the machine that is designed to fulfill our full range of creative possibilities. Anyhow, those are some things I've been thinking about. I think they point to some work we've already been doing and some work we need to start doing. And but I think it's all positive and speaks to great opportunity. I want to echo what Doug said. The league staff has been monumental, magisterial, magnificent, just phenomenal in every way over the last 2.5 months. I've never been more proud of them. And you've given us a big challenge to try to provide help to you in a time of enormous need, and they have really, really stepped up. And I know that if we were in a big ballroom in some hotel, I'd ask them to stand and you'd all be cheering. So this is that cheering moment. And I'm going to just leave a couple of seconds for a big roar to go across the internet for league staff. And as that's quieting down, also just the word about Simon. And nothing could make me happier that the person who's going to take the reins of the league is Simon Woods. He's a unbelievably gifted leader, and I know the league will do well with him. He will have new and different ideas, which is great, and welcome. And but I think there's something Simon and I have in common. And I would say, you know, in leading an association, I always think that this is kind of like a little bit like dancing. You know, you have to listen to the music really carefully, and you have to know when to follow, and you have to know when to lead. And nobody wrote any books about this. It is definitely an art. And I am totally positive Simon is a great dancer. So that makes me really happy and should make all of you happy too. And the last thing I want to say is, any of you can see this poster behind me. I hung it up because it's a great symbol of the strength of our community. It's a poster from when Hurricane Katrina came to New Orleans, and the orchestra, their hall was flooded, the Mahalia Jackson Theater. But the first time people could come out after Katrina was to hear the orchestra. For 4 years, they played in schools and churches and community centers, but they didn't have any money. And so Alan Valentine, who ran the Nashville Symphony and still does, he put on a concert. He hosted a concert in Nashville for the benefit of the Louisiana Philharmonic. And I was there. It was sensational. And if there's ever, you know, a vivid reality to this idea of orchestras being stronger together, that concert was it. And that is a spirit that really keeps us connected and healthy and strong. And I know that will serve us well in the future. Anyhow, that's all I wanted to say. So thank you very much. And Doug, back over to you. Okay,
I'm going to again exercise the prerogative to applaud on behalf of the hundreds of people who are watching this broadcast. Thank you, Jesse, for your remarks. And that leads me to an impossible challenge that I have. Since this is Jesse's last conference as CEO, we have to recognize his extraordinary service. But we do so today in an abbreviated form. I want to assure you that there will be a full opportunity in the future to recognize, recount, and celebrate everything Jesse has done once we're able to actually get together and have a party and celebrate together. But here's an overview of a few things that you need to remember about Jesse and that we will celebrate about him when we get to that point. Under Jesse's leadership, the League has advocated for orchestras' deeper engagement with community, renewed efforts toward inclusion, greater discipline regarding fiscal matters, increased use of data to inform decision-making, and widespread engagement with composers. During his tenure as CEO, and indeed in his 20 years at the League, Jesse has initiated a renewed focus on research benefiting the entire orchestra field, and has created new programs and initiatives in areas such as leadership development, governance, EDI, artistry, capitalization, and community engagement. Always looking for the edge of the future, Jesse instinctively gravitates toward creativity and innovation. There's been a large increase in the number of members of all sizes benefiting from League programs and initiatives, as well as an upturn in the profile of orchestras among the nation's policy leaders, cultural and opinion leaders. Under Jesse's direction, the League has been a catalyst for the field's work, the field's collective action on EDI, which is a great example of Jesse's thought leadership in our field on many subjects. Perhaps Jesse's most important legacy at the League has been to make the case for orchestras to shift their focus outward, away from our own artistic excellence and other internal measures of performance, as he urged us to place new priority on establishing our civic value as orchestras in relation to our communities, in which we exist and which we serve. If this were an in-person conference, I'm confident that an extended standing ovation for Jesse would ensue. In lieu of this, and until we can gather again for a great party in Jesse's honor, please join me in sharing your congratulations with Jesse in whatever way you see fit, either now or when he steps down as CEO in September. I suppose the greatest thing that we could do to recognize Jesse's legacy is to focus on the four things that he just commended to us: culture of collaboration, leadership development, EDI, and creativity. Four great chapters for us to write in the future. So on behalf of all the League members, thank you, Jesse. So now to talk a little bit about our next CEO, Simon Woods. In April, our search process for Jesse's successor came to an end, and we introduced Simon as our next president and CEO. Our selection of Simon is based not just on his experience and credibility in our field, but also on his track record of advancing the League's mission, for example, through the Essentials program, which he led, and his vision for change as orchestras pursue deeper engagement with their communities. And of course, there's his passion for orchestral music. But most important to me are Simon's personal qualities that will nurture our organization and its members, qualities such as listening, integrity, and humanity. We have Simon here to say a quick hello. Hi, Simon.
Hi, Doug. And of course, I'm frozen. Can everybody hear me?
I can hear you, Simon. Doing good. Go ahead. We'll give him a second to recover. Okay, so here's what we're going to try and do. We're going to go to the next little thing. Oh, there's Simon. Hi, Simon. Can you hear me now? Okay, you're on mute.
Yes.
There you go. All right, go for it.
Inauspicious beginning. I start and the first thing that happens is my internet crashes. Thank you very much, Doug. I really appreciate the introduction. Very, very kind of you. And I want to say a huge thank you to the board of the League for entrusting me with the leadership of the organization at this time. I mean, it's an extraordinary time, and I can't wait to jump in. And to Jesse, what do I say to Jesse? Well, first of all, I'm a horrible dancer, so that analogy doesn't hold. But I definitely will try to do everything I can to do the things that he talked about, which is juggling and listening and leading, and then that beautiful combination that he's been so good at over the years. And you know, to be honest, orchestras have been part of my life for over 40 years, and American orchestras in particular have given me my career. They've given me many of my friendships. And ever since I first landed in Philadelphia back in 1997, I've always been involved with the League. Over the years, I've hosted a couple of conferences. I've chaired the Group 1 orchestras. I've taken part in many of the League's professional development work. So for me, it's more than a job. It's in some ways like joining a family that I've known for very many years. But it is, as everybody says, a very strange time, and I'm aware that I take over at a very strange time as our field faces unprecedented challenges like we've never seen before. And if there's one thing I think that I've learned over the past weeks of quarantine, it's how much I treasure the live music experience. The invention, as everybody's talked about so incredibly eloquently, the invention has been amazing to watch. I mean, we have, from orchestras from the very smallest to the very largest, have completely reinvented the way they think about the world and engaging with the world. And you have the incredibly strong conviction that things are never going to be the same again. And yet I also have an equally strong conviction that some things will be the same again, that the live experience will never die. We will get back to playing Mahler symphonies. And as we take that journey home, which is how I like to think about it, the League will be here to support and encourage and advocate. But it's not only about institutions. I think anybody who knows me well knows that I care not only deeply for institutions, but also the people in them. And when I look around this business, which I love so much, I mean, it's an extraordinary collection of people: musicians, conductors, management leaders, agents, professional partners, board members, donors, foundations. You all are why I'm in this job now, and taking over at this precise moment. So our institutions may have brick and mortar and history books and recordings, but right now it's about the people. Ever more than ever, it's about the people. So my pledge to all of you is we'll be here for your institutions and we'll be here for you as we take this journey together over the coming years. So thank you very much again, everybody. Thank you, Doug. Huge congratulations to Jesse and gratitude for everything you've done. And I can't wait to work hand in hand with you, Jesse, in the next year as we look after this incredibly treasurable organization. Thanks all. Stay safe.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you. We really look forward to welcoming you to the helm in September and everything that's going to flow from that. So my last duty today is to welcome Alan Valentine, CEO of the aforementioned Nashville Symphony, with a pitch for you that I hope you all will seriously consider. Thank you. Go ahead, Alan.
Well, thank you, Doug. So I'm here today to talk about Stronger Together League Giving Days 2020. And since this is the second year in a row that I've been asked to make this pitch during the League's annual meeting, I'm guessing that some of you will stop taking my phone calls before too long. But have no fear, I'll still find you. I know that we've all seen and heard by now numerous pitches for League Giving Days 2020. And with that, I would like to add my voice to the call for support for the League. If I were in front of you in a banquet hall, as was the case last year in Nashville, the first thing I would do is ask for a show of hands from each of you who are affiliated with an orchestra that has either received an SBA PPP loan or any other form of federal assistance through the CARES Act. Once again, the League has demonstrated its value to our field through its great leadership in giving voice to our concerns in Washington, even before all of us understood how badly we needed that help. But it doesn't stop there. In addition, the League's steadfast leadership in advancing the work of equity, diversity, and inclusion in our field and in our institutions, even in the face of the pandemic, And though we have a long way to go in that arena, we're on a path that will undoubtedly make our institutions and our art better. The League has also added significant value to membership this year with their increase in activity and resources in response to COVID-19, from additional peer-to-peer calls to pivoting this conference to an online conference in record time, I might add. It was just astounding how fast that happened. Removing barriers to attendance by making it free to all members, and tripling attendance in the process. And they did all of this so well. But like all of us who manage orchestras or are involved in orchestras in our own communities, the League also is suffering from a lack of earned income as a result of this pivot and as a result of the pandemic. And as we all confront that issue, you know, most of the League's earned income comes from conference registration fees. And it has had a very serious impact. So for those of you who haven't given yet, and by the way, I happen to know that only about 10% of you attending the conference this year are current donors, the time is right at this moment for you to join me and join all of us involved with the League as donors in making your own gift to Stronger Together today. You know, universally, I know there are a lot of demands on your finances, and you're each making tough decisions about your philanthropic support. But let me give you a little perspective about how you can approach this. In a typical year, a trip to attend the League's conference in person typically costs anywhere from $1,500 to $2,000, depending on where you are in the country. So a gift of 10 to 20% of that amount, say $150 to $400 of your typical conference costs, would go a long way to supporting the work of the League and all that they are currently doing on our behalf. So know that whatever you decide to give, it'll be deeply appreciated, but it's important for all of you to please think about this and make a generous gift to the League before this conference is over. It's really critical to our lives and our future. So I encourage all of you to give and give generously. Thanks.
Thank you, Alan. It's now my pleasure to introduce Nina Simon. And in doing so, I want to recall something that took place over 10 years ago when Heather had the good idea that it was time for the field of orchestras to do a little bit of public perception research. And we did this research, and the findings were really quite informative. And we got really high marks on excellence. Well, that's good. So we work on that. And, you know, we got high marks on education. And we got low marks, really low marks, though, on serving a broad cross-section of community. That's where we did badly. And that was when the League kind of sounded that alarm. And we said, we have some issues to work on. And we said, these aren't issues only of perception. These are issues of behavior. The perception issues are there because of the way we behave. And we have a lot of learning to do about how we serve our communities. And over the 10 years or so, I think many of us in the performing arts have been asking, what does that look like? How do you actually do that? Because we certainly know it's more than giving a free concert in the park and showing up in your schools periodically. And the development of practice that helps inform how we do that work authentically, effectively, has been something that's been taking place. And fortunately, there are people like Nina Simon who've been figuring it out. And actually, there aren't too many people like Nina Simon. She wrote the book. She actually did write the book. It's called The Art of Relevance. And Nina used to run the Santa Cruz Museum of Art and Culture. She is since leaving there after enormous success and turnaround, started something called Of, By, and For All, which is an organization devoted to inclusive practices for organizations. And oh, I see what's going on. Okay. So, and you know, she's also happens to be headlining all the big conferences this spring. And when I saw it, I thought, oh my God, you know, geez, she's everywhere. And I thought, well, that's bad. Then I thought, well, you know, it's kind of like what you all do, right? I mean, everyone books yo-yo. And so, you know, I'm just thinking that Nina is the yo-yo ma of relevance. And it is an enormous honor. And I'm very excited that we have her here at our conference. And I am now going to hand it over to Nina to take us away. Nina, over to you.
Thank you so much, Jesse. I have never had such a complimentary opener. I really appreciate it. As you can probably guess, either from the title of the keynote or from this slide, we're going to be spending the rest of this hour really looking deeply at how we might reimagine and revision relevance for our organizations so that we can build organizations out the other end of this crisis that are more inclusive, that are more relevant, that are more sustainable. And before we get started, I just want to honor the fact that there are 550 people here, which is incredible. And I also, though, want to honor those who are not able to be with us today. People who are in mourning, people who've lost their jobs, people who are trying to figure out where they're going to find their rent for next week. It truly is a gift for us to be able to take this time together to think about revisioning and reimagining. And I hope we can use that gift to its fullest. Now we're going to start by talking about this poll. Thank you to the 300 of you who took this poll before we started. I asked you this, you know, if I offered you a blank check right now for one of the following paths forward, what would you do with the money? And we had these options to pay your team until you could come back to normal with a reserve, to use the money as risk capital to reinvent how you work, to redirect the money to other organizations and people who are in greater crisis, or to let the existing organization die and build something new. Well, as I mentioned, as of about a minute ago, 302 of you had taken this. Here are the results so far. So about 2/3 of you say you would use it as risk capital. You're coming into this hour ready to reimagine, ready to reinvent, and I've got a lot of great offerings to share with you today. But I also want to acknowledge that almost 30% of you would really love to go back to normal. This is completely understandable, and I don't think normal is coming back anytime soon. And so what I want to do today is to equip you, wherever you fell on this poll, to get excited about the potential for reimagining and to offer a really concrete 4-step process to do it. Now, before we dive into that, you might be wondering, who is this person and why is she anybody credible to talk with us about reimagining? Well, like you, I know what it feels like to be flung into crisis. I know what it feels like to have to reimagine your organization while it feels like there's a ticking time bomb in your bank account. And I also know how amazing it feels if you can do that work of reinvention and come out stronger on the other side. You see, as as Jesse mentioned, 9 years ago, I became the director of this place, the Santa Cruz Museum of Art and History. I was a brand new director, very excited. But in my first week on the job, I discovered that we were completely out of money. I knew we had a relevance problem. I knew we had a little bit of a financial gap, but I didn't realize how harsh it was. The day I walked into the museum, we had $16,000 in the bank, we had $36,000 in unpaid bills, and there was no PPP check coming on the horizon. We were talking about closing the doors of the museum. And so in my first week, I laid somebody off. At my first staff meeting in that conference room with the wobbly tables, I asked all of my colleagues to join me in taking a 20% salary cut. I told them I believed we could reinvent the museum. I believed we could enact this vision that they and the board had come up with to become a thriving gathering place for our community. But I also believed that to do so, we had to change, and we had to change very quickly. It was a hell of a first week. And I'm sure many of you have had incredibly tough weeks like this in the last few weeks or months. And today I want to share a little bit of what that reinvention looked like for us. Now, I know that our crisis was not a global pandemic, but it threatened our survival nonetheless. This museum did not matter enough to enough people to survive. And when we acknowledged that simple truth, we were able to start to change. We decided we wanted to be a museum for everyone in Santa Cruz, that we wanted to invite in people of all ages, backgrounds, and walks of life, that we wanted to invite them in as creative agents themselves, not just to look and learn, but to share their own voices and their own creative talents in the space. We wanted to build that vision of a thriving community gathering place, both inside the museum and out. We were successful, and the result was extraordinary. So when I came in 2011, that time when we had no money, we had a budget of $700,000, we had 7 people on staff, and we had 17,000 visitors, the majority of whom were school kids and retirees. Within a year, we were in the black for our first time since 2008, and we had tripled attendance. And by the time I left 8 years later, here's what it looked like. We've been able to incredibly increase our budget, our staff, to both increase and diversify who was visiting and participating, and to build a $5 million expansion and a reserve on top of it. I'm here to tell you that this kind of reinvention is possible. Yes, even in a pandemic. Yes, not just at a museum in Santa Cruz, but around the world. As Jesse mentioned, after I left the museum, it was to found this startup nonprofit called Of, By, For All. And we provide digital tools to organizations around the world that are growing closer to their communities, and all of them on change journeys now with those communities in the time of pandemic. Our digital tools have been used by several thousand people around the world, and we're working closely with 42 organizations in 11 countries in a program we call the Change Network. All organizations going on change journeys, transforming themselves through crisis with their communities. And today, I want to offer you a concrete process for reimagining, rooted in what we're learning with our members in the Of, By, For All Change Network, and in my own experience reimagining that museum long ago. So I'm going to invite you to think about 4 steps to reimagining. And the first is quite simple. It's something you can do entirely on your own. You can do it in this hour, in fact. And that is to invite you to choose to change. You know, I think when we think about crisis, we often think about this idea that, oh my gosh, because of this crisis, we must change. We need to change. And while that may be true, it obscures the reality that not all of us actually want to change. As we saw in the results to that one question poll, there are about 30% of you who feel like, gosh, I understand I might need to change, but I really like to go back to normal if I could. And so I invite you to get out of this unhelpful dichotomy of whether you want to change or not, and instead to think about this. Can you choose to change? Not because you want to, but because you feel it's necessary. I think we've all made choices to change in the last couple of months that we probably didn't want. Self-isolating, taking care of each other, wearing masks. We didn't make those changes because we wanted to. We made them because we looked at what was happening on the outside and we decided and made the choice to do so. Perhaps for some of you, these last couple of months have been full of pain and suffering. Perhaps some of you have found grace and joy in some of those changes. Wherever you are, you're here because you chose to change in response to what you saw on the outside. So I invite you, as you think about your organization, to ask yourself, what might you choose to change? And maybe even an easier question to answer would be this: what wasn't working for you before the pandemic? What was broken? What drove you bananas? What was unjust? What do you never, ever want to go back to doing again? You know, I've been talking to leaders across the arts about this question and hearing some really interesting things. I talked to a theater director who told me this. He said, you know, our season was canceled. We're freaked out financially, but it's also a huge opportunity to unleash ourselves from the subscription model. This artistic director told me that they had seen subscriptions declining over years. They had seen how subscription and focus on subscribers had prevented them from doing some bold programming and investment in new audiences they wanted to do, but they just couldn't let it go. And when I talked to him, he said, hey, we just canceled a season. We're free to pursue a different business model for how we engage with our closest patrons. Or I talked to a ballet director who told me this. She said, you know, touring is something that we loved on one level and hated on another. Yes, our dancers loved going out on the road to connect with communities, but we also knew that those connections, if it was just a 1 or 2 night engagement, were very superficial. And frankly, from a financial perspective, touring was a total crapshoot. Sometimes we made money, sometimes we lost it. And she said to me, you know, I've decided to choose, instead of just playing chicken and asking when can we go back on tour, to cancel touring for at least the next 18 months and to ask and challenge ourselves to figure out, can we reimagine ways that we might connect with people in other communities more deeply and more sustainably? Finally, I talked to a young man who works in a large orchestra who told me this. He said, you know, I'm scared that senior management in the orchestra world will not use this time to walk away, to choose to move away from things that weren't working for us. His email included a lot of brilliant ideas for transformations that could happen in his orchestra. I'm not going to share them with you right now because A, they're his, and B, there are people like him in your organization as well. Young people, people of color, activists who have been thinking for a very long time about the opportunity for change. I don't think it's a coincidence that all 3 of the people I've just cited are people of color. In our fields, these are people who often have been leading the charge for change for years. They've been thinking about it deeply, and they have solutions to some of the questions that some of us are addressing for the first time. So as you choose to change, I invite you to think about who you're choosing to do it with, and to make sure as you're making tough decisions that the people who are most likely to help you lead change, those activists, those people of color, those young people, those community engagement staff, are not the people you're laying off. Now is the time to listen to these folks, not to furlough them. And once you can figure out what you feel motivated to change, then you can go to this next step and think about who you want to change and move towards. And the second question I would ask you to think about is this: who do you see as critical to the future of your organization? Who do you see as the staff of the future, the audience of the future, the patrons and the partners of the future? And how could you invest now in moving towards them so that this can be a time of growth and transformation and not a time of retraction and retrenching? The way I like to think about communities abstractly is this. Imagine that within your city or within your region, there are all these different bubbles of communities, different groups of people who share something. If you think about your organization before the pandemic, you had existing communities who loved you. These were the people who always came, who always participated, who volunteered, who gave. You probably also, before the pandemic, had some communities that you were moving towards, communities you saw as strategic to your future. Maybe you had an incredible teen program, or maybe you had a fellowship for artists of color. Now I ask you at this moment, as you think about the tough choices ahead, who do you want to invest in? I see a lot of organizations going in this direction, retrenching on their traditional audiences, letting go and cutting those fellowships and community engagement teams, and knowing even as they do so, that some percentage of their traditional audiences are probably not coming back or not coming back anytime soon. I think this is a bad strategic move. And I would invite you instead to ask, how could we spend more energy and effort on those communities we were moving towards, and maybe on some of the neighboring communities who could be part of our future, so that instead of coming out of the pandemic with an audience and a community and a constituency that looks like this, we could come out with a constituency that looks like this. Let me give you an example of what this might look like from our Of By For All Change network. Casa Santa Ana is a contemporary art center in Panama City, Panama. And like a lot of contemporary art centers, especially in a city like theirs, they've decided traditionally that the audience that they're easily able to engage are local art lovers, especially elites, and international artists who they bring in to do projects and exhibitions. They also know and have known since they opened, though, that they have a problem, which is that they're situated in the neighborhood of Santa Ana, which is a low-income, very populated area of Panama City. And they know that there are creative artists in Santa Ana, and there are families in Santa Ana who they want to connect with, but who they have not historically been able to do so. That's why they came to be part of the Of By For All Change Network, to bridge this gap, because they really saw that if they could not become beloved by their local community, they believed they could not be successful. So, here's what this looks like, right? So before the pandemic, they have their traditional communities of these artists and art lovers, and then they had these communities of interest, local artists and families and in the neighborhood. Now, what's happening during coronavirus? During coronavirus, their traditional communities are less engaged. International contemporary artists are not traveling, and local art lovers are not coming out. But at the same time, they're seeing more and more opportunity to engage with those audiences and communities of the future, both with local artists and with families in the neighborhood. So 2 things that they're focusing on doing during this time. One is that they've become the largest distributor of food in the Santa Ana neighborhood. They've raised tens of thousands of dollars and given out thousands of bags of food to families in the neighborhood, along with notes and creative activities inviting them to be in relationship with the Art Center. And they've also created this online program, La Voz de Santa Ana, where they're collecting and connecting with local artists and illustrators to share their work inspired by coronavirus. They are investing their energy in moving towards those audiences of the future, those communities who they want to be in partnership and conversation with, so that their future looks more like this. And so I would invite you to think about who is critical to the future of your organization. Yes, as audiences, but also as funders, also as staff, also as volunteers and partners. And how can you use this as a time to move towards them, instead of hunkering down with those you've worked with so long in the past? Once you think about who, the next thing you can think about is what. What assets do you have to share with these communities that matter to you? And what assets do they have to share with you? In Of By For All, we really take an asset-based approach to the work that we do, because we believe that if you focus on assets, you're inviting people to engage from a position of strength and agency instead of from a position of deficiency. A lot of times community work, we really take a needs-based model. Oh, these poor kids don't have music, they don't have art, they don't have X. If you focus there, yes, you can do something good, but you can also take this Lady Bountiful kind of approach that can make people really feel deficient, demeaned, like they don't have agency in the experience. But if instead you can say, let's look at the assets we all have, the creativity you have, the tools we have, the activities we could do together, then you can create something more powerful. One of my favorite examples of an asset-based program is the Symphony for a Broken Orchestra. This is a pre-coronavirus project that was created in Philadelphia by a combination of Temple University and various other partners who you'll see in a moment. I want to show you a 2-minute video clip just to give you a sense of this project. And as you watch this clip, I invite you to listen carefully for the way they talk about assets in this project. All right, so hopefully this is going to play. Here we go.
Broken instruments in the school district of Philadelphia has become a huge problem.
If we would have had this instrument working, she's a dedicated student. She would have definitely passed that audition with no problem.
When it's unplayable, it kind of just goes into what we would call an instrument graveyard. We keep all the broken instruments in one place and they just collect dust.
There are a lot of organizations in this city that want to support the school district, and this is a very tangible way to do it. So there's something very exciting about sort of the message that it sends to repair these instruments and get them back into the hands of kids who are really hungry for opportunities like this.
Each of these instruments has its own individual problem. So each of these instruments needs to be investigated, needs to be listened to, it needs to be respected. So the music I write for it is going to have to be unique to it. And then each of these instruments, as part of this process, is going to be healed. Each of these instruments is going to be made whole again.
The fact that there's a light being shined on this issue here in Philadelphia is big and encouraging and uplifting. And as a member of the Philadelphia Orchestra, I'm excited because these students will actually have a pathway to one day hopefully be one of my colleagues.
Bringing visibility that instrumental music is alive and well, and to see that bulk of instruments, and this only represents the ones that are not being played, it helps us with our advocacy message that music teachers are working in our schools, 220 strong every single day, and a lot of kids are benefiting from instrumental music, and we only hope to see that grow.
I came up with this idea for Symphony for a Broken Orchestra because I wanted this challenge facing the School District of Philadelphia's music education program to be seen as something other than a problem. All of us can now see these instruments as opportunities to take an active role in being a part of the solution through adopting an instrument and making a contribution towards its repair, or volunteering at the performance, or even playing in the Symphony for a Broken Orchestra.
I love how in this project, you hear everybody just in 2 minutes talking about assets. The teacher talking about the young musician with their potential. David Lang, the composer, talking about how each of these instruments has a unique sound to be honored and brought out. And the artist talking about the opportunity for all of us to come together around something that really matters to the people of Philadelphia, around music and music education. During this time of coronavirus, I've seen so many positive examples of how people are getting really creative about looking for and highlighting new assets, and doing so in ways that build solidarity, that build hope, and that build strength. And so today, even as you might feel incredibly stressed about the reduction in assets for your organization, I invite you to think about how you might creatively repurpose and reimagine the assets that you do have. One of my favorite examples during coronavirus is this organization, Slung Low Theatre in the UK. They have the blue van on the right here. When coronavirus hit, Slung Low realized, like a lot of theatre companies, that one of the assets they had was a van. They use this van to take equipment when they do shows in different theaters, and they realized that this van could be repurposed for distribution of food and supplies. And they actually got other theaters as a picture of 2 theaters with 2 vans participating in relief efforts in their area. But Slung Low got even more creative about the assets they had to share. They actually realized that as a grassroots, very energetic, innovative theater company, they were incredibly good at bringing together volunteers to create something big, to put on a show. And they realized that those same talents they had for bringing volunteers and energy together could be applied to put on a different kind of show, a relief effort. And so they actually became the contracted nonprofit for their city, responding to the coronavirus hotline, delivering everything from food and medical supplies to helping people find lost cats. They also realized as they did this that another humble asset they had was a printer. And they invited people across their city to send in pictures of artwork they had made, and then Slung Low would print it up and stick it on telephone poles around the city. Alan Lane, their artistic director, has written really beautifully about the work that they're doing at Slung Low. And one of the things he talked about in a recent article was this idea of what his theater company is fundamentally for. And he said, what we're for is not selling tickets or beer. What we're for is to tell big stories and then make them true in the world. And he said, one of the big stories we tell is that our community comes together. And we do that by doing this relief effort. And another big story that we want to make true is that there's creativity in every household and every person in our city. And hence the poster project was born. Alan said, of course they want to get back to making theater, to inhabiting their space. But that won't stop them from doing the work that is their fundamental purpose by really creatively rethinking their assets during this time. So the last step in this I want to share is about how you do it. And really, it comes back to the prior 3, that I believe if you can answer these 3 questions creatively and courageously, you will come up with a bold plan to revision your organization. I invite you to think about how you might ask these questions, not just with senior managers, but with many people across your organization. How you might talk about it with musicians, with community engagement staff, with front of house staff, with some of the community partners you see as part of that audience and that community of the future. If we are going to radically revision, we need to listen to new voices. The old voices got us where we are, which is beautiful. But new voices are going to help us think about what's broken, what we might choose to change, who we might move towards, and what assets we might creatively repurpose. If you're feeling like you're not sure how to do this or how to answer these questions, I hope you'll stay in touch with me. We are at Of By For All creating a really simple, structured program to help you step by step create a revisioning plan. But whether you stay in touch with us or not, I hope you will choose to change. I hope you will commit to reimagining. I think that if you do so, you will create a plan that doesn't just serve your organization or your team, but serves your stakeholders, your donors, and your partners as well. You know, when a funder asks you after coronavirus, or a community leader, when they ask you, what did you do during coronavirus? They don't want to hear, we hunkered down, spent down our reserves, and saw what came next. They want to hear, we took this as an opportunity where we chose to change. We committed to new communities who are important to our future. We got really creative about what assets we have to share. We stopped doing things that weren't working for us anymore. And together, we built a plan to become more inclusive, more relevant, more equitable, and more sustainable. We now have a bold vision for how our orchestra can matter more to more people. Let's build that vision together. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Nina. That was a wonderful presentation with lots of really rich examples and great guidance in it. And as questions are coming in, there's one that I want to ask you right off the bat, and it's simply, you're doing this work globally and seeing organizations in action. What are you learning about the organizations that do well with this approach and this framework, and what are you learning about the ones who are struggling with it?
I think that, you know, it really comes back to that idea of choosing to change, Jesse, where what I've seen is that there are organizations that have not made that deliberate choice. And those are the ones that are fighting themselves, even internally to an individual or to an organization, because they're playing chicken with themselves about, well, maybe it'll go like this, maybe it'll go like that, as opposed to saying, you know, we are going to commit to get better in a way that matters to us, regardless of when we can reopen. And I think that it takes so much mental energy, as we all know, to focus on the immediate and the near term. And if you can instead give yourself permission to say, you know what, I'm not going to worry if we can reopen in 3 months or 6 months or 12 months. I'm going to assume it's far out, and I'm going to say, how do I want to change to be where we want to be when that day comes? And actually, one of the most powerful things I've seen, and obviously Casa Santa Ana is an example of this, is organizations saying, we see this as an opportunity where when we reopen our doors, we want new people coming in with us, and we are going to move towards them now. And it has created a sense not just of giving something to do, but real purpose. And I think, you know, we're all experiencing this individually as well, right? This question of, oh, did I spend this time watching Netflix? Did I learn how to do a pull-up? Do I feel great about that? Do I not? You know, how do we take care of ourselves as we also pursue things? But I think that for organizations, particularly organizations where there are a lot of different people all going through these questions for themselves, if there can be clarity and shared commitment of, we want to move in this direction and now is our opportunity to do so, those people I've seen come forward with a lot of creativity and a lot of energy, and they have a container in which to reimagine, as opposed to feeling like every day they're asking, will it be next week? Will it be in 3 weeks? You know, and I'll say also, I've seen across the network in Of By For All that I think performing arts organizations have an incredible challenge and an incredible gift that is different from a museum, a library, or a park. Museums, libraries, and parks are all now talking very seriously about reopening. Some of them are already open now. And there's a sense of there's daily engagement happening, and they really have to focus on things like health and safety and what's happening today, tomorrow, next week. And I've talked to a lot of performing arts organizations where they've basically said, we've canceled the season. So they've created this space for themselves by making that decision. And then they have to decide, what are they going to do with that? The other thing I'll say, and then I'll open up to other questions, certainly something I learned from my time at the MA, and I'm seeing and hearing from the most courageous leaders, is they're saying, I'm cutting back and I'm not making promises that we're going to refill the positions we had before. That we believe if we actually do our jobs right, we may be growing in a different direction after the crisis. And yes, we care about and are incredibly sympathetic to the people who are losing their jobs, but we also know that it's not our job to go back to exactly what we were before. It's our job to go to something better, and we are starting to think about what the structure of that new thing is. And I think my biggest fear there is that we won't involve more diverse voices in that conversation. And I think that that is a problem, both, as you said, in terms of the potential for it to retard progress we've made on equity, but also, frankly, because I believe that some of the most creative ideas are going to come from people who have been agitating and itching for change for a very long time. And those are more likely to be people who have felt that everything was not so perfect. And there's a heavy overlap in terms of people of color, younger people, those people who've been kind of nudgy and annoying in meetings for quite a long time. They're probably very useful to your organization right now.
So I'm kind of interested in, you're pointing out that organizations are complex and they have people at different stages within them, different people holding different amounts of power.
Yes.
In terms of where an organization moves. And you've commented on younger people, people of color, people earlier in their careers who are not, may not have positional authority in an organization. Right. What advice do you give to people who are not the decision makers and the people who can actually make the choices that you're proposing?
Yeah, one of the things we do in all of our programming of By For All is we encourage organizations to form a team that is diagonal. So a team that includes people in different departments, but also different levels of power. And some organizations I've talked to, their leaders have been really thoughtful about saying, I'm creating a reopening committee or I'm creating a reimagining committee. And they've gotten very deliberate about saying it includes somebody from janitorial. It includes somebody from front of house. It includes, an artist. And I think that, especially frankly, and I know this very personally and intimately, in a time of crisis, if you're in a leadership role, you often feel like, oh my gosh, it's all up to me. But actually, there are so many things on your plate at this moment that it could be a great time to bless and permit a diagonal team or a team of people from different perspectives, different levels of positional power to do some of this reimagining. And then to have trust that they're going to come back with some ideas that you can really help shape and sell and move forward with.
Thank you. Here's a question. What about organizations that do not have funding to keep any staff on beyond just the basic administration to keep the organization running, like only able to pay someone for 2 to 3 hours per week?
Yeah. So I have two thoughts about this. Well, three. The first thought is, I know how hard that is, and you know best how you need to spend those 2 to 3 hours. Thought number two, if you can spend some of those 2 to 3 hours on reimagining, you're going to come out in a stronger position than where you were before. And then thought number three, and this is frankly what I did at the museum, it is a great time to engage people who care about your organization in doing some of this along with you. Somebody actually remarked to me the other day that their board is more active than ever. And they said, I got to find something for them to do or they're going to get in trouble. And one of the things that's been interesting to me is to see, we know that this crisis is hitting different people very inequitably. And there are some people who have more capacity right now to dream and to act and to participate than others. And so I think that there are a lot of people who would be very excited and responsive if you reached out to a few community leaders or people who you see again as relevant to your future and said, hey, we want to radically reimagine our organization to be more relevant to our community. We are going to hold 4 meetings on Zoom for an hour each. There's no prep. Would you participate? I think you'd be surprised at who might say yes now, who might have been impossible for you to get to before. And by the way, if you do get some yeses from those people, once you build a bold vision, they're going to be highly invested partners with you in selling that vision to the supporters who might be helpful in making it happen.
Great. This question kind of follows on your answer. It's almost the question that your book answers. What are some of your favorite methods for gathering qualitative data for understanding what's relevant and important to audiences?
Yeah, I never ask what people want to see. I think that people, when they take something like a survey are so attuned to trying to please you and trying to answer what you think. And that's actually particularly true if you're reaching out to people who don't know very much about what you do. They will serve back to you, oh, I never come to the library. What do I want from the library? Books, I guess. What do I want from the museum? Exhibits. So instead, what we really focus on is this idea of asking people about assets. This is a great time to ask people, what are you proud of? What do you hope for your community? What new strengths are you finding right now that you didn't know before? I can't tell you how many arts organizations get stuck in a needs-based model where they will say things like, oh, that neighborhood or those people, they don't make art. They don't care about art. We are finding so many ways in coronavirus that is so patently untrue. And I've always believed it's untrue, but I think it's a time actually where people are exposing and engaging their creativity differently. So I would encourage you to ask people, what matters to you? What are you proud of? What is important to you as you think about the future? And there are a lot of different ways to do that. You can do things like surveys. You can also do things like creative response. Casa Santa Ana, in giving those food bags out, it started out just giving them out with a message that said, we care about you, we're your neighbors, and neighbors take care of each other. They eventually transitioned to having some creative materials, and then they transitioned to having a prompt and a question about the neighborhood and the future of the neighborhood. And so inviting people in a creative way to talk about what matters to them. So I believe if you can know what matters to somebody, what they're proud of, you will be able to build something strong together. I feel that way 100%. Because, for example, if you found that if you asked people, even something like, what role is music playing in your life right now? I would take a very different approach if I heard from people I cared about that they said, oh, I'm dusting off my guitar, I'm picking up my trumpet again, versus if they said, oh, I find myself listening on repeat to the songs that give me solace. There are very different programmatic choices I would make based on what I heard in terms of what matters most to people right now.
Thank you. Here's another question following on what you've just been talking about. This process sounds more natural in smaller to mid-sized organizations. Do you have any insights for building structures in larger organizations to listen to those new voices?
Yeah, one of the sad and interesting things that's happening during coronavirus is, of course, large organizations are becoming mid-sized organizations, and mid-sized organizations are becoming small. I will say that things like diagonal team building are actually somewhat easier in larger organizations where there are more different roles going on. There is more diversity of thought and perspective on what the organization does and what it could do. I think we've also seen, though, that, and this relates to a question from John Zinn about organizational culture and making these teams, I think you have to create kind of a permissive zone. My title is CEO and Spacemaker, and that's a very deliberate reminder to myself that I feel like my job is to make space for others, to take risks, to experiment, to try new things. And I think that now's a time where we have to really make that space and that permissive space and give ourselves a self-permission to try something new. So I think that, we're all exploring how our organizations are working differently. We're all exploring whether, do we do an all-staff Zoom town hall, our departments meeting, what's happening? And so I think there's actually an opportunity, especially if you're in a leadership role, to call out, hey, I think there's an opportunity right now for us to create a container for something more experimental than we've been able to do before, or for us to do a cross-departmental experiment around the future. By the way, those are also terms you can use if you're managing up and trying to get somebody to convince something, that if you can kind of present, this is a special time, let's use the opportunity to do something special, and let's give ourselves some different rules in the space of this. I think that can create the kind of cultural opportunity that can move this forward. And again, I think there's also this question of, what do you choose to change? And if, for example, you had a very siloed structure in the past, Do you choose to replicate that in where you're going, or is this a time to experiment in new ways around teams? I think that everybody right now has very limited capacity. And so the opportunity to say, let's have a small group focus towards a particular goal and feel successful and completion at that is incredibly powerful. And that's one of actually the principles we're really taking into this reimagining program we're creating, is this idea that reimagining can feel so big, it can feel so messy and unknowable, and that can feel stressful. How do we make it as simple as possible? So you could say, okay, great, I've got 5 weeks. I could do an hour and a half a week for 5 weeks. Okay, I can imagine that. I can put my arms around that. So creating permissive space and creating a container where people know when their job is done and that they've been successful is going to be important, I think.
There's a question here that you've answered the first half of it, which was really about how do you prepare for these diagonal teams and do it successfully. But the second half of the question is, what are the measures of success? How do you know you're making any progress?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is why I'm very focused on the idea of how can you do a revisioning sprint or focused effort. And, I think this can really be a summer of reimagining where you have a concrete outcome. To me, if I were running an organization again, what I would be looking to do as a concrete outcome is to say, here is a plan that I can sell to stakeholders, that I can sell into my team, that I can sell to donors and supporters. And again, being able to answer that question, what were you doing during coronavirus and what are you going to do next? And to be able to answer it with something really exciting. And obviously, I'm a little far on a radical perspective, but I've been hearing from all kinds of voices, whether it's, DeVos and Michael Kaiser or others who are saying the organizations that are going to be successful on the other side of this are ones that are going to have something bold and compelling to share about what comes next. And so if you believe that, then I would ask myself, I would go backwards and say, okay, what do I need to put into place to have something bold and compelling to share? And again, we're developing a process that's rooted in this choose who, what, how. But I think you could also take a process of saying, we're going to have a wide open, invitation of ideas from across the organization and do some kind of ranked prioritization around it. Or we're going to bring in a few of these community leaders to help spitball around some ideas, and we're going to take some forward. I think there's a lot of different ways to approach it. But I would start with the end and say, if success looks like I have a plan, I can sell, and I can communicate well, then you ask yourself, what do I need to do to get to that plan? And also acknowledge that this can't be a strategic plan that's multi-year. We don't know what the future is going to hold, really. And to, come up with a plan with very detailed things it's going to be disingenuous, I believe, on some level. So what is that 2-page vision? What is that exciting story about the future that you want to build?
Thank you. Here's another question, that, again, in the category of that in orchestras, often people who are working in them have very different experiences as part of the organization. And this question goes, what do you see as challenges to workplace culture in orchestras where performers are guaranteed a contractual pay raise while staff salaries are frozen or staff are furloughed or laid off?
Right. And I didn't want to presume what you all might want to change or what is broken or drives you nuts, but I might imagine in orchestra world, there might be some things around labor and also just about that bifurcation of artistic versus administrative and how do we come together. And I guess that, maybe there's even, my limited understanding is there's some experimentation and some flexibility happening there right now as everybody's looking at what is possible next. Maybe there's even an opportunity to create a reimagining space, again, with a container that's clear to say, hey, let's try doing something in a different way together, and let's do it towards creating a vision, and let's see what it looks like on the other side. I would also say that, musicians care about this too. I know there are a lot of musicians with us here today. And frankly, when I think about who might have already been experimenting with different models for engaging people deeply with music, probably many musicians are in that category. And so I think there's an opportunity to say, how could we create a zone for experimentation together? And again, how are we going to commit to choose to let go of things that weren't working for us, even though we know it might be quite painful to make some of those choices. Just as it'll be quite painful to cancel touring or to cancel a subscription model, what does that look like for your organization, and what's the work you're willing to do to make that change?
And, you know, again, to the fact that you're working globally, all over the world, this is my own question. What are you finding to be uniquely American attributes as they approach this work, and how are they the same or different from what you experience around the world?
There's a bright side, challenging side of what I'm seeing in America versus other parts of the world. The challenging side is one we won't be surprised by. These organizations in America are less funded publicly than in other countries. There's less of an assurance of funding. There's much higher financial risk and pressure right now, no question. On the other hand, I am seeing a lot more openness to experimentation and creativity and that flexing of organizational culture here than in other countries. You know, I was talking to, it may seem a weird analogy to orchestras, but one of the kinds of organizations we work with quite a lot is libraries. And librarians, you know, they're rule followers, and they really, like, they have a lot of systems. You know, the Dewey Decimal System exists for a reason. And I've talked to so many librarians in the US who have said, gosh, it feels like Wild West here. My director, I have more access than I ever had. There are these group conversations. There's opportunities that things that used to take months now take days to get done. Versus in Europe, where libraries are this funding is much more stable. I'm hearing about a lot more of a move towards command and control, and a lot less of that creativity. And across the US, I think that there is, you know, we have this democratic intent and ethos, whether we always live it out or not. But I've talked to a lot of people who've said, gosh, you know, we never had a meeting of all the artists or all the faculty or the company with the staff together, and we're doing that for the first time. And so I think that the question I would have to anybody who's excited by a little crack you see opening up, to say, how can you strategically widen that crack? How can you make sure that it's not like when you reopen, things will just snap back? How can you say, gosh, it was really great when we met together, musicians and staff? How could we do more of that? How could we restructure so that that's more possible, as opposed to feeling like, oh, this was a special time and now something's going to change? As we're ending our time, I just really want to say thank you to everybody. I'm going to put in the chat, if you want to stay connected with me, or if you want to hear more about the reimagining tools that we're building, there's a link here where we'll send you the slides tomorrow. They'll also be available through the League. But I'd love to keep in touch. And this is sort of my way of virtually exchanging business cards with you, since we're not physically together. And I just want to thank you all so much for having me. It really is an honor and a gift. And I hope that we'll use this gift to its greatest potential for our communities and for our organizations. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Nina. Really great to have you. Thank you for spending this time with us. And you've given us an awful lot to chew on. Thank you. And read Nina's book, by the way. It's fantastic. Really, really terrific. And also her TED Talk's really great. So you'll all be pleased to know that I can't find the closing remarks, which is supposed to give you a whole bunch of housekeeping things, probably also reminding you to make a donation to our Stronger Together campaign. So you're not going to have to hear that again. And but if I recall, some of what I'm supposed to tell you has to do with filling out the evaluation of the session, which I think, if you're in feed loop, is living on the side of your screen, I think on the left-hand side. And today's session has been recorded, and probably by sometime tomorrow, if not sooner, it'll be up. But I think we'll be sending you a link or a reminder about that. And what else? I think someone's trying to tell me what else I'm supposed to say. Well, too bad. So it's 2:30, and it's the end of our time together. So Nina, again, thank you so much. Thank you all for being with us this afternoon, and we'll see you again tomorrow at 1 o'clock. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.